These are all strategy decisions that you ultimately need to make. What do you want to stand for? How do you want to come across in the marketplace? What is your brand? So many times people today still think of their brand as their logo, the hexadecimal colors, the fonts that they use. The reality is, in today's digitally driven, self-propelled marketplace, your brand is everything that the marketplace says about your company and your team when you're not in the room. And given that you're not in the room anymore for the first 83% of the buyer's journey, it is a really big deal about your brand and recognizing just how much branding has changed. And so much of how branding comes down to building a personal brand, building a company brand, being seen as the go-to experts in your space. Hello, data center friends. Good morning, good afternoon. Maybe for some of you, it might even be good evening. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's live stream for the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the most pressing challenges that are raised by you and your peers, including those from data center operators, technology companies, facilities companies, real estate and construction companies, and sales and marketing companies in and around the data center ecosystem, data center industry and marketplace. Doesn't matter whether you are in marketing, sales, customer success, account management, product management, channel partnerships, or you're an executive sponsor, or maybe you're part of a data center operator or enterprise data center, such as co-location, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, or modular. If you are looking to improve how you go to market, how your team goes to market, how your company goes to market, you are for sure in the right place. So let me know where you're watching from and what you do in the data center industry. Just comment there and hit the like button, help to spread the reach of this show. So what is on the agenda for today? First up, I'm going to talk about how an optical interconnect solutions company can get representation. So how a company that does optical interconnects can get representation to grow their company. Next, we'll look at how a hyper-converged infrastructure and AI company can identify the right customers, clients, consumers. And then we'll turn our attention to how to navigate the data center industry as a newcomer. Then we'll take a short break for a quick message from our sponsor, and then we'll come back with talking about how to find available data center equipment manufacturers for representation. So that's really interesting. We have one question this week on how to get representation, and then we have people that are in the business of representation looking to find data center equipment manufacturers. Next, we'll look at how a data center design and build firm can generate better leads. And then we'll head down the home stretch this week by looking at how a company that does broadband, fiber, and IT services as a solution provider can improve their content creation and strategy. Now, if you are just discovering this Q&A show for the first time, what I would recommend is that you follow and or subscribe on the channel that you're watching this from, but even more so to get more direct notifications of this resource and similar resources, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter, which comes out every Sunday directly to your email inbox. And you can sign up for that directly on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. So first question up for this week is, how can an optical interconnect solutions company get representation to grow? That's a great question, and it's a fantastic time to be asking that question, because I think the answer to that is quite different today than the answer would have been 3 or 5 years ago. Why is that? Well, the way that your buyers, and it doesn't matter whether you're selling to mid-market or enterprise or small and medium-sized business, or you're looking for channel partners, your buyers research and compare options and evaluate pricing and make their purchase decisions very differently today than they did as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. If I was answering this question 10 years ago, I would have told you that based on all of the current available research, you can count on the fact that most of your best prospects are not going to meet your sales team till they're about halfway through their buyer's journey. At the time, the predominant stat that was cited was 56% from CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, that's now part of Gartner. So at that time, about 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before vendor contact, before sales contact. That number has accelerated forward like a rocket, reflecting everyone's self-service buyer's journey, where so many people are doing so much more on their own before they get to you, that number now hovers at 83%, and it's accelerating even faster, meaning the latest from Gartner found that 83% of researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing happens before you ever get to meet a prospect. This is a huge deal. And because of that, the answer to this question of how a company that does optical interconnects can get representation, we need to talk about what you're getting representation for. Because the only way that you're typically getting out of the commodity broker box is by getting in early and having an active role in how your prospects research and evaluate all of the different competitive options that are in front of them and evaluate pricing. If you're able to get in early and you and your team are seen as teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders, you have an enormous opportunity for them to invite you in to their side of the table. And so you can help them frame all of the different ways that they look at optical interconnects and everything that goes into that. However, if you're not able to get in early, someone else is doing that job. Someone else is answering their biggest questions, helping them with plans on how they can achieve their goals by sharing best practices about how other stakeholders in similar companies, similar size, similar regions have navigated these issues. They're sharing advice and insights on how they can address their biggest challenges, their biggest struggles, what's causing them to have to pull all-nighters, having to cause them to miss vacation time away from friends and loved ones. When you're able to get in early and you're able to fill that void of being seen as the teacher, the trusted advisor, the subject matter expert, you gain enormous leverage to the point where you're almost guaranteed to be on the short list. In some cases, you may do such an exceptional job that you have effectively neutralized all of the other competitive options on the short list. So by the time they're at that 83% point, you're the only company that they're left talking to because it's become such an obvious choice that you win so head and shoulders above all of the available options. So what concerns me about the language in this question is how can our company get representation is what are you getting representation for? Are you getting representation for another company to own the first 83% of the journey? And hopefully you're their only option that they're recommending when that buyer gets to the 83% point that they're ready for sales contact? Is that what you're getting representation for? And if so, are you missing out on the opportunity for all of the learnings that comes from spending time with your ideal clients, your ideal prospects throughout the entire buyer's journey? Because oftentimes this kind of question of how can I get representation, I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. Most of the time, it's because the company is either undercapitalized and can't afford to hire an in-house sales team, or doesn't want to hire and play the long game and hire an in-house sales team. So they're looking for someone to solve this problem, similar to how a business model might have existed for decades, like in the recruitment space or in the real estate space, where people are basically working on a commission-only basis. And this could be called manufacturers reps. It could be called distributors. In a slightly different industry, it might be called affiliate marketing or being a reseller. But either way, that if you are abdicating the first 83% and the final 17%, you are without a doubt missing out on an enormous opportunity to gain customer insight that would not only shape your go-to-market strategy, but may shape your product roadmap. If you're counting on your manufacturer's reps being your product managers and giving you all this insight that's going to reshape your product roadmap, are they really giving you an exclusive in their category? Are they really not sharing this insight with other companies? And the reality too is when you get manufacturers rep, channel partners, resellers, affiliates, distributors, whatever you want to call it, on this multi-tier distribution thing that's, it's existed for decades, but in the era of marketplaces and self-propelled research and buyers being in the driver's seats and everything, If I were running a business model like that, I would be making very rapid investments to try to reposition my team as the employees of a manufacturer's rep company or a distributor or wholesaler or channel partner or something like that. So your team members are seen as the go-to experts in your space. So your team is seen as the experts about your buyer personas and their biggest goals and challenges. So your team is seen as the trusted advisors, because that is the only way that you're going to get leverage that you need throughout this full buyer's journey to truly be able to shape the criteria. Because if you don't get in early, someone else is getting early. So this could be a direct competitor, it could be an indirect competitor, it could be a media company, it could be an events company, but make no mistake, someone is getting in there early. So if you want it to be your manufacturer's rep and you're okay with the fact that they may or may not be doing this the way your buyers want to buy, and because of that, maybe putting themselves in a very compromising position when it comes to bidding and sacrificing profitability and margins and everything like that. If that's how you want your company represented, well, you're probably not self-aware of how much buyer preferences have changed. And if the representative, the reps company that you're hiring hasn't woken up to these changes in buyer preferences and they're still using the same playbook that they did 10 or 20 years ago, that's also not great for you. So sure, there are absolutely positively manufacturers reps companies that work in and around the telecommunications side of the data, the technology, the telecommunications side of the data center industry, specifically around optical interconnects. The question is whether that makes the most sense for your company. Usually, again, this question is being asked because you're trying to avoid having to staff up your own internal sales team. Probably because you don't have the financial resources or the patience to be able to do this. And obviously, another alternative for companies that want someone to take over this head of sales, like chief revenue officer kind of place in a relatively early stage company that can only get representation by doing it in this way, is maybe you need to look for a co-founder. Maybe you need to come to the conclusion that a far preferable alternative to abdicating all of this customer insight research and abdicating all this brand building and natural progression of your company and getting out of the commodity broker box, maybe a far preferable option is to give up 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever it is of your company and bringing in a co-founder who can stay with you for years, who has a really strong vested interest and working just on building your company together 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. 100% of their time is not fractured in 10 different directions like a channel partner or a manufacturer's rep company would be. But these are all strategy decisions that you ultimately need to make. What do you want to stand for? How do you want to come across in the marketplace? What is your brand? So many times people today still think of their brand as their logo, the hexadecimal colors, the fonts that they use. The reality is, in today's digitally driven, self-propelled marketplace, your brand is everything that the marketplace says about your company and your team when you're not in the room. And given that you're not in the room anymore for the first 83% of the buyer's journey, it is a really big deal about your brand and recognizing just how much branding has changed. And so much of how branding comes down to building a personal brand, building a company brand, being seen as the go-to experts in your space. And there's still a place for manufacturers reps companies to do this when they're highly specialized and they're seen more as like providing extremely valuable high-end consulting that rivals the kind of consulting that someone would get if they went to like Deloitte or PwC or KY or KPMG or something like that. But if the staff that works for the manufacturer's rep company that you hire comes across more like car salespeople or residential real estate or commoditized commercial real estate brokerage or something like that, nowhere near the level of sophistication of like industrial, like data center specific real estate, then you could have a problem down the road, because even the deals that get closed, the question is, are the expectations being managed correctly? Is there over promising, under delivering? Are you risking massive reputational damage because of how the reps are going to market? So yeah, at the end of the day, you really have to ask yourself if this is really what you want, and if you're going into securing representation with both eyes open. because in a world where so much of buyer preferences now is being driven by self-service and people are falling in love with self-service marketplaces, uh, manufacturers rep companies really need to step it up 3, 4, 5 levels from where most of them are operating today. And some of them are doing it, some of them are not. Make sure that you do your homework and you go in with both eyes open if you're serious about finding the right representation for your optical interconnect solutions company, or just representation for any kind of company that operates either as an outsourced data center operator or a technology company, at like where telecommunications and optical interconnects would be a subset of that, or something facilities related or construction or real estate related. Make sure you go in with both eyes open, that it's all about your brand and your reputation in the marketplace. Next question up is, how does a hyper-converged infrastructure, HCI, and AI company, artificial intelligence company, identify the right customers, clients, consumers? My guess is if the word consumers is being used, it's either B2C, which this isn't likely, or it just may be that this is an international issue where consumers isn't necessarily the right word. Most companies in and around the data center industry, when they refer to the entities that buy their products or services, would either refer to them as customers or clients as opposed to consumers. Consumers would be like business to consumer. That would probably be more like a company like Apple or Spotify or Microsoft that's selling something to end user consumers outside of a business to business context. So we'll do a slight edit on this question, and just more talking about finding the right customers, finding the right clients for hyper-converged infrastructure and AI. What it largely comes down to is, does your company currently have product market fit, and have you achieved go-to-market fit? So product market fit, PMF, is the degree to which you know exactly who your ideal customers are, who your ideal clients are, the products and exactly the products and services that they purchase from you within the context of hyper-converged infrastructure and AI, at what price points they purchase those products, the HCI and the AI, from you, how frequently they purchase, for what durations. Basically, you have good knowledge of your unit economics. And the way you know that a company, especially an early stage company, has product market fit is when you look at their website, you see on the case studies page 3, 4, 5 similar kinds of companies that would allow you to bucket those kinds of companies into a single ideal client profile, a single ICP. So an ideal client profile would define typically the geographic location that your ideal clients reside within, the company size, if there's any business model or industry specifics within there. So the closer your case studies are to that, the more likely it is that you've achieved some degree of product market fit, where you can answer all of those basic questions around who your ideal clients are, the products and services they purchase, the price points that they purchase at, the frequency, the duration, and overall just understanding your unit economics. Like your, if you have recurring revenue, what your monthly or annual recurring revenue is, what your lifetime value is, what your cost of acquisition, those basic things. Go-to-market fit is the next level beyond that. What go-to-market fit is, that means you've gotten beyond or way beyond founder-led sales. You've hired a sales team, you're scaling a sales team, and you know what your cost structure looks like, fully burdened, and various line items within there. When you're taking into account your cost of sales, sales incentive, sales compensation, the overhead for the sales team, marketing incentives, marketing compensation, the SaaS, the platforms that you use to run all this, any advertising, any sponsorships. So all of that all rolled into one, divided by the number of customers you've acquired in a given year. You end up with your average revenue per customer, and you start to get on the right track of knowing that you have go-to-market fit. And any kind of recurring-based business, and this is something that started more in SaaS and software as a service, but has a lot of applications for infrastructure as a service and similar kinds of businesses, is understanding how your new clients get the right value from what they signed up for. So a typical thing with a SaaS or IaaS company would be is somebody signs up, they're on a recurring arrangement, they're billing every month. But the question is, are they getting out of their commitment to you what they intended to get out of it? So when you talk to people that specialize in like customer success, CS, or account management, In software and infrastructure, they might have like a life cycle or milestones that come around with like initial value, intended value, and extended value. Like, what were they hoping to get initially out of your company? What did they intend to ultimately get out of your company? And how have you gone above and beyond that? When you're able to answer that with a high degree of certainty, so you know what they got initially, what they intended to get out of your company, and what they get on an extended basis, then you basically need to be looking through your client list and seeing how you're doing. Are you living up to what their expectations are? If you're not, you're going to have all kinds of churn problems and reputational problems, and your flywheel is going to come to your growth flywheel is going to come to a pretty abrupt halt pretty quickly. So if your company has product market fit and it has go to market fit, then you're in a good position to say that, okay, I have identified who our right customers are, who the correct customers are, who the correct clients are. And now I want to go about building an ideal client profile, like we were just talking about a few moments ago. From that ideal client profile, I should be able to build out a target account list. This is something that more than likely you're going to manually compile, or at least manually review if you get the data from other sources. And it could be anywhere from a couple dozen companies to a few hundred, or maybe even a few thousand companies that are similar to the kinds of companies that you've provided hyper-converged infrastructure and AI to in the past. So you have, let's say we're in the Goldilocks scenario, we're in that middle ground, we have a couple hundred companies we're trying to target. Now, within those companies, who are the one or two most important kinds of stakeholders that we need to be building a relationship with? These are going to be called buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client based on actual research and some select educated speculation. Your select educated speculation, the reason why I say some, is if you've been doing this a while, chances are internally there are some pretty strong opinions of who your customers are and what makes them tick. And it's fine to have those strong opinions be about 20% of what goes into your buyer personas. But if you want to get this right in their language with their priorities and not assuming that you know the exact words that they're going to use and where they hang out and all the things that actually drive their priorities, you can't make too much of the select educated speculation and too many assumptions. You actually need 80% of it coming from actual research. So when you get this actual research, you'll get some pretty strong consensus on what each buyer persona's biggest goals are that they're trying to achieve to get to the next level in their career. Maybe these are things that show up in a job description. These are things on which they would get a bonus or a promotion. And on the flip side of the goals is their biggest challenges, their biggest struggles, what's stressing them out the most. What if they don't figure out could put their position within this company in jeopardy? They could end up losing their job. They could end up getting demoted, or worse. So once you know that, you're in a position to say, okay, there's 2 or 3 different kinds of stakeholders. I have based on how we got these case studies and the relationships they have with these clients. I'm going to prioritize and say the most important one is the primary buyer persona. And the second most important category of stakeholder that I want to build a relationship with, now that I have all this great customer insight research, that's we're going to call a secondary buyer persona. Maybe there's a tertiary buyer persona, the third most important kind of stakeholder that you want to build a relationship with. And now that you know their goals and challenges, you're going to build a calendar for creating subject matter expertise, content, thought leadership events like this. It could be live streams, it could be webinars, it could be offline events like lunch and learns and breakfast seminars and things along those lines, where you have a chance to educate and build trust at scale with the biggest goals and the biggest challenges that are top of mind for that particular buyer persona. So when it comes to identifying the right customers, this is a huge part of this, is knowing where you've been most successful, using the pattern recognition of where you've been most successful to build out your ideal client profile. Within those, once you have your ideal client profile, you can build out a list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand companies that would fit that ideal client profile. And then when we roll up our sleeves, we need to understand in those companies who we need to be building a relationship with. And it's usually an amalgamation of a bunch of different job titles or similar kinds of roles where they behave the same way. And the behave the same way is even more important than the actual job titles. Because their behavior when it comes to their goals and their challenges and their preferences is what's going to drive how you do your segmentation, how you do your personalization of your content and personalization of events. And then you take that content, those great events, and you've already learned from that buyer persona research where they hang out online and offline, their watering holes, where they get their information from. Then it's about creating distribution and promoting and getting the right people to show up to your educational content experiences. So like the reaction you're looking for is for them to say like, wow, this is like super helpful. What an eye opener. I never thought about it this way. What else do they have to say? And when you get that reaction, that's what earns you a virtual seat at the table. That's what earns you the ability to be present in as many of those 28 natural touch points as possible that come between complete stranger and purchase decision. Where a lot of people get off track is they overspend, they overinvest on field marketing and events and conferences and trade shows. And they make a good impression, but that's just one of 28 touch points that you need to have with that individual. It's not like that person is going to wait till you come back next year at next year's conference to continue the conversation. Of course not. They may not be ready to buy tomorrow or next week or even next month, but you can bet they're not waiting till next year's event to get their questions answered. When they're ready, they're going to go on LinkedIn, and they're going to go on YouTube, and they're going to go on Slack channels, and they're going to text message their peers, and they're going to ask their friends, and they're going to go on review websites and attend webinars and podcasts. And so the question is, how well prepared is your company to show up in the right places at the right time with the right people in the right context so that you and your company and your team are seen as the definitive experts in that buyer persona at the intersection of hyper-converged infrastructure and AI? If you're confident that you're able to show up in a lot of those 28 touch points to the point where you're in there at least 50, 75% of the time, give yourself a nice pat on the back. If you're not, it's time to step it up and get super serious about understanding who they are, what they care about, and how you're going to show up in a way that allows you to earn your way in the first 83% of the buyer's journey and not just get to talk to them when they're almost ready to purchase, because it's incredibly important if you want to plant the seeds to get in there as early as possible so that you are seen as the go-to experts and the go-to company when it comes to anything and everything having to do with hyper-converged infrastructure and AI for this particular buyer persona. Next question is, how do we navigate the data center industry as a newcomer? That's a fantastic one. And I'll give you a little history as to how I started to navigate the data center industry when I was a newcomer. For the better part of 12, 13, 14 years, I worked with managed service providers, originally coming from having my own IT services company, providing outsourced fractional CTO services to small businesses, and then getting to know dozens and hundreds of other people that had similar kinds of businesses through some work in the Microsoft channel partner ecosystem, with co-leading a user group and writing for a trade publication, speaking at Microsoft channel events, writing a book for Microsoft, all of that stuff. So in the course of doing that for the better part of 12 to 15 years, hundreds, I think about 2,000 people ultimately went through our training program on how to grow their trusted technology advisor business among small and medium-sized businesses. In the late 2000s, early 2010s, as the industry was moving from premise-based client server infrastructure to SaaS and public cloud, a lot of those companies were struggling because they were still using a business model that looked a lot more like trying to emulate a certified public accountant, a CPA firm, rather than a technology firm. But the ones that weren't struggling, the ones that were actually still profitable and still growing, I saw going in one of three directions. They either moved up to mid-market companies and started working on ERP, enterprise resource planning, or something very similar to that, like manufacturing systems or high-end CRM, customer relationship management. So they either became like ERP specialists or something very close to that. Some of them became custom software developers, meaning they were building web apps and mobile apps. And again, both of those moving up markets, we're getting them into six-figure clients. We're getting them into large clients, much larger deals where they could afford to make significant investments in growing their talent and how they did client acquisition. And the third group that was still left standing that was reasonably profitable got into some facet of co-location. Either they put their own box in someone else's facility, like a Digital Realty or Equinix or something like that at that point, and they said, okay, I have a server. I have 20 outsourced IT clients. Probably at least half of them could use some space. I'm going to let them get fractional space on my server, or a couple, or a cluster or something like that, or something with virtualization. Or the really forward-thinking clients said, hey, Josh, you're our outsourced CTO. We have no idea what to do with this, but we just came back from a conference. We know we need a dedicated box. We'll pay for the box. We have no idea what to do with the box. We have no idea even how to specify it or how to find a good data center facility. You take care of that. You put it in there. You're going to be in charge of our provisioning. You're going to be in charge of the management, and you just add it on to our bill of everything else that you already do to our company. So that's how I originally got into colocation, because I saw the MSPs that I was working with going in one of those three directions. And when I originally arrived, I thought that colocation was most of the data center industry. Now, 10 years on later, I realized that colocation, there's a lot of there's thousands of colocation providers globally competing in what's now become a rather mature and in some cases very commoditized market. But aside from just colocation, there's other kinds of operators in the space. There's wholesale data center companies, there's hyperscale data center companies, there's edge and modular companies, and then even beyond the outsourced operators, the outsourced providers, you have dozens of different kinds of technology companies, dozens of different kinds of facilities related companies. Obviously, the technology companies are primarily selling to a data center manager or a technologist. The facilities related companies are primarily selling to a facilities director or facilities executive, facilities manager. And then you also have the whole real estate and investment, the REITs, the real estate investment trust, the whole capital structure that funds these massive investments. You have the construction companies, and there's dozens of subcontractors that could be getting involved in some facet of construction of these huge wholesale and hyperscale data centers. And then in addition to that, there's about a dozen different kinds of outsourced sales and marketing related companies that operate in and around the data center ecosystem. So when it comes to navigating the data center ecosystem, the data center industry, the data center marketplace as a newcomer, what I would tell you at the high level is there's operators, there's technology companies, there's facilities companies, there's real estate and construction companies, which are probably more first cousins than not, although certainly they have different business models, but they definitely hang out together. There's no large construction projects that are being funded without a large investor getting involved and being able to debt or capital or something along those lines. And then there's a good handful or two of sales and marketing related companies that provide outsourced services in and around the space. So that's how I would suggest navigating the data center industry as a newcomer, is having awareness of all the different segments within the data center industry that are relevant to growing this very exciting space. And it is a very exciting space. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA is calling for like $1 trillion of new investments, $1 billion of, it's a big 3-0 difference. There's a ton of investment going into hyperscale data centers trickling down into the rest of the industry over the next 4 years. Michael Dell is predicting like 100-fold increase in data center demand over the next decade. There's massive amounts of companies that need this expertise. Obviously, there's a lot of sustainability and grid issues and everything that are going to be coming along the way. But in terms of just navigating and getting your mind around what's going on in the industry, I hope by answering this question, I've been at least a one-on-one level tour guide or concierge of how the data center industry is structured. That'll help you find your way around a little better to understanding the different segments and who's providing what within the data center industry. And with that, we're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsor.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching our weekly live stream show, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, where each week I tackle a handful of the most pressing challenges that you and your peers have raised among what you are struggling with to get to the next level in the growth of your data center industry. So the next question up is how to find available data center equipment manufacturers for representation. How to find available data center equipment manufacturers for representation. So, if I'm inferring correctly here, your company is a manufacturer's rep, or a distributor, or a reseller, or some kind of commission only type of sales force. What in other industries might be called an affiliate marketer, but typically would have a more sophisticated wrapper around this because of the level of training and insight that you need to be successful in this space. So, in order to find data center equipment manufacturers that your company can represent, I would suggest a multi pronged approach. The first thing to recognize is that B2B buyers research and make purchase decisions very differently today than they did as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. Today, it's very common to find that most of the buyer's journey is happening in a self service fashion. If I was answering this question 10 years ago, typically buyers did about half of their research and then they were ready to talk with someone like a manufacturer's rep or a sales rep or an account executive or sales development or someone in that capacity. At the time, about 10 years ago, CEB, the corporate executive board, doing research with Serious Decisions and Salesforce, found that about 56% of a typical journey was over before vendors contact. Fast forward ahead about a decade, including a few years where most people were working from home during the pandemic, and people are in love with self-service now. They want to really be in the driver's seat through most of the buyer's journey, and they've gotten super comfortable with self-service in so many different facets of their personal and their professional lives. They're asking tons of questions on search engine and through Gemini and Copilot and Siri and Alexa. They're super comfortable making all of their travel reservations, making major purchase decisions in a self-service fashion, cutting out a lot of the intermediaries that have existed in the past. So what does this mean for an intermediary type of company like a manufacturer's rep? Well, my advice would be to lean into this in the same way that others in the data center ecosystem are leaning into this. In order for your company and your individuals that work with your company to have enough leverage in the early and middle stages of the buyer's journey to be invited into their side of the table, so you're in a position to significantly influence how they research and navigate all of the different options, how they compare all of the different options, all the criteria that they use to evaluate all the different options. You need to figure out a way to get invited in as early as possible. And really, the only way to do that going forward is to reposition yourself away from being seen as a transaction-focused sales company to be seen more as subject matter experts, teachers, trusted advisors, and thought leaders. And what that almost certainly revolves around is being in a position to educate and build trust with scale, trust at scale with the most important buyer personas, the most important kinds of companies that would be buying data center equipment from the companies that you represent. So what I would look at is where you have been most successful in the past. Are there case studies on your website? Have you done that kind of thing in the past? And when you've done that, are you able to back into seeing enough pattern recognition to document an ideal client profile so you know company size, location, business model, industry? From there, are you able to back into having a target account list and knowing who your prioritized buyer personas are? Once you've prioritized the buyer personas, the group of the most important stakeholders that you need to be building relationships with, and you've documented their goals and their challenges, you've done the actual research so you know what they care most about, what's driving their decision, what they're struggling with the most, then you need to flip the switch of saying, the days of us being able to barge in and interrupt them and be loud and aggressive just to get our foot in the door have come in sunset for the most part. For us to be relevant in these early middle stages of the journey, manufacturer reps teams need to be seen more like big four consultants, where the value of what you're providing in the early and middle stages of the journey needs to be so good that it feels like $500 an hour, $1,000 an hour type of consulting, or your local currency equivalent that rivals what they would get if they went to like Deloitte or PwC or KPMG or EY or something like that. When you're able to get to that level of competency, proficiency, empathy, and providing extreme value to them, the whole dynamics of these interactions completely changes. They're coming to you looking to get time on your calendar as opposed to you begging them to get time on their calendar. That's an enormous, enormous context shift. So once you have that in mind and you've determined that there's a couple hundred companies where you're in a really good position to take all of your decades of expertise and help them reach the best decisions on how to evaluate all of the different data center equipment manufacturer options that are in front of them, then you're in a position to start saying, we're going to publish research reports, ebooks, podcasts, blog posts. At the risk of getting a little meta, we're going to have a podcast and live streams and webinars and offline versions of those, like lunch and learns and breakfast seminars. Again, it's not going to be focused just on social stuff here. We're about being seen as teachers and experts and trusted advisors. And long before we talk about products, we're going to help demonstrate our value by showing that we're able to help them navigate what's in front of them, because we've worked with dozens or hundreds of other similar companies, similar kinds of stakeholders in these companies. And based on the muscle memory, we can anticipate not just what they want to know today, but what step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, et cetera, is going to look like. And why is it important to think that many steps ahead? Because in today's buyer's journey, self-propelled buyer's journey, there may be as many as 28 touch points that you need to be involved with in between complete stranger and purchase decision. If you're doing a lot of event marketing and field marketing, you may be knocking it out of the park on one or two of those 28 touch points. But what about the other 25, 26, or 27 touch points? Are they really waiting around to the next time that you do an event? Of course not. Are they going to be ready for a conversation tomorrow or next week? Maybe. But you know the stat too that 95% of the people that you come into contact with are not in market today, but could be a fantastic fit a couple weeks, a couple months out from now. So we need a way to stay in front of them without constantly nagging them. And that's where your content, your thought leadership, your great event series, your great webinars, all of that comes into play. So if you really have a two-pronged problem here, you're looking to find data center equipment manufacturers, and then you're looking to find clients for those manufacturers. So at the absolute minimum, you have like two different ideal client profiles going on and two different ideal client profiles of the ideal client profile, like a derivative of that going on. So if you're looking for the equipment manufacturers, obviously the first order of business is convincing those equipment manufacturers that you'd be a great manufacturer's rep for them. But once you're contracted by those companies, then the real work begins, right? Of going out and finding the end client. So be super careful with that segmentation as well. At the absolute minimum, it certainly needs to be a contact property or a field in your CRM so you can distinguish the two. But in the reality, you probably need two different go-to-markets for that. If you're a big enough firm that you have the luxury of being able to divide and conquer with splitting that up among two different co-founders of your company, it may be better. One's in charge of going to find the companies to represent and nurturing those relationships. And the other one would be, again, maybe it's 80-20 or 70-30 or something like that. It's up to you to figure out the split on the time of how you invest those resources. But they're different issues, right? The topical expertise, your insights certainly will carry a lot of weight with both of them, but they're for sure a different ideal client profile. They're different, for sure, a different list of targeted companies. So that's how I would approach finding available data center equipment manufacturers for representation. For sure, there are companies with mature channel partner programs that you could latch right into and plug right into. But I sense by the way that you're asking this question that you're looking for something a little bit more exclusive. You're looking for something probably working with smaller companies or companies that may not have a lot of surface area in your particular geographic region. There's a lot of different reasons why companies look to indirect channel partners and manufacturers representatives. But to grow that kind of business in this day and age, I would very, very strongly recommend reevaluating your positioning and making sure that the lead customer facing, client facing, market facing people on your team are seen more as subject matter experts and a lot less like sales, transaction focused salespeople for hire on a outsourced representative basis. The days of that succeeding are very, very numbered. There's so much more self-service preferences going on right here. And in a lot of ways, you're competing against marketplaces. So in order to make sure that you're able to add value at a completely different level, you need to make sure that you're investing in your expertise and your personal brand and your company's brand at an entirely different level. Next question up. How does a data center design and build company, design and build firm, generate better leads? How does a company that's principally in the business of design and build generate better leads? It's a fantastic question. The first place to start is one of the biggest misconceptions that I see with companies that uh, I do consulting with is there's a very fuzzy definition, very ambiguous definition of what a lead actually is. Most of the time, when relatively small companies or salespeople that are used to deep in the journey and having lots of big institutional support are asking for leads, what they really mean is they're looking for sales opportunities. However, a sales opportunity is pretty far along in the journey, and it's not a given that people show up as sales opportunities anymore because there's so much more self-propelled research going on in the early and the middle stages of the buyer's journey. A typical buyer for data center related design and build services is doing a massive amount of upfront research on their own before they're ready to talk with anyone from your team. Gartner found that 83% of a typical journey now happens before vendor contact, before contact with a sales team. That's researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing is all happening largely before they get to someone from your team to talk about design and build services. So the question is, how do you earn your way into that first 83% of the buyer's journey? How do you get them to invite you in so you're seen as a subject matter expert, a teacher, a trusted advisor, and a thought leader, and not just a biz dev person for a design and build company? That's the $1 million or $100 million question here is, what are you going to do to help your biz dev team, your account executives, your sales development reps? How are you going to help them reposition themselves so that they're seen as helpful experts as opposed to someone that's just nagging prospects, begging for the opportunity to get a foot in the door and pitch something? And that's largely where we are today. In order for you to get better leads, your transaction focused business developers really need to be seen more as consultants and advisors that are providing such unique insight and expertise in the early and middle stages of their journey that it feels like free consulting that's so good that the client almost feels like this feels almost as good as if they were paying $500, $1,000 an hour or their local currency equivalent to consult with someone from a big four firm. Or the equivalent in the data center space. So when you're able to rise to that level, it's game changing for your team to be invited in the right context to really, really shape how they evaluate all of the different design and build options that are in front of them. Conversely, if you don't do this and you continue to use the same playbook that you've used for the last 10 or 20 years, you're going to be largely invisible in the first 83% of the journey. And there's a really good chance that if you're really that asleep at the wheel, you're not even going to have a role in the final 17% of the journey. But if you're fortunate enough to use your door openers or use your great contact list and connections in the community to bust your way in for the final 17%, the unfortunate part is the only thing that's going to win at that point is cheaper. Um, you've been commoditized because you haven't had the chance to really shape how they evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them. And it's not a great place to be. It's very demoralizing to your team. Your CFO is going to cringe. Your margins are always going to be terrible. And you're going to feel like you're always treading water. So the key thing is making the time and financial investments for your team to get in early and get in often, so that in those 27 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, you're into as many of those 27 touch points as possible with ebooks, blogs, webinars, podcasts, events like this, at the risk of getting a little meta, live streams, webinars, offline versions of this, like breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, and similar kinds of educational experiences where you're focused on teaching valuable insights and best practices on how other companies in their space navigate design and build decisions in the data center industry. And you can even infuse some light social proof in there if you have clients, customers, partners that you can bring on on panels, panel webinars, panel events, collaborating, co-marketing. You can make an enormous difference to sharing best practices around others that have these big design and build projects, how they're navigating the available options that are in front of them. So that's how you get to the point that your sales opportunities are largely pre-sold on your company, or at the minimum, you're certain that you've earned a place on the short list. When you do it really, really well, you, in some cases, maybe the entire short list. Large design and build projects, it's pretty far-fetched that your content experiences alone are going to completely neutralize all of the other competitive options, but you can definitely stack the decks in your favor. At the absolute minimum, you'll get the inside track on what's going on. But you also may get some extremely valuable insights on things that need to flow into how you present your offerings to the marketplace, like basic like product management type of. I know people don't talk about product management very often in the design and build space, but more than likely there is someone on your team who operates at a strategic level, or a team that operates on a strategic level, that shapes how you product position, all that stuff around what it is that you do with your design and build services. So for sure, by getting in early, you're earning the ability to figure out not only the changes that you would need to customize for this particular opportunity, but for similar kinds of opportunities going down the road. And if you're not in there early, there's a really good chance that you miss those valuable insights. So first, start by understanding the big difference between what a lead and a sales opportunity is. Second, recognize how incredibly important it is for you to use your insight, your expertise, your institutional knowledge, your ability to educate and build trust with your most important buyer personas is an incredibly, incredibly important priority to make to grow a business like this in this kind of marketplace, in this kind of environment going forward. And the sooner you warm up to this, the easier you're going to make it on your sales team. Recognizing for a lot of companies that last did a major revision on their sales and marketing playbook like 10 years ago, these can be big cultural changes. So in a lot of cases, in most cases, it really needs to start from the top down. Obviously, if you're a huge company with tens of thousands of employees, it's far-fetched that your CEO is going to get involved. But if your company has a few hundred or a few dozen employees, yeah, for sure, this is a C-level kind of initiative that needs to lead by example and trickle down with getting out in front with your team and all your client-facing staff, being seen as the go-to experts in the space, and making a decision that you're not going to allow other companies to control the airspace and control the messaging and control the narrative, that you have unique insights that other companies don't have. And you want to make sure that you're out in front with that as much as possible to have a very active role in as many of those 28 touch points as possible between complete stranger and purchase decision with anything and everything that's related to data center design and build. Our final question for today is, how can a company that does broadband, fiber, and IT services, a solution provider that does broadband, fiber, and IT services, improve content creation and strategy? Well, they for sure go hand in hand. Content and creation and strategy for broadband, fiber, and IT services. How can we improve what we do? Hopefully tying a clear line in sight between that and revenue growth. What it largely comes down to is, the first thing to figure out is, are these clients buying all three of those categories of products and services from your company? In other words, do most of your broadband customers also buy fiber, and do they also buy IT services? If so, you likely have one cohesive set of case studies, logos, reference kinds of accounts that you can use to build a single ideal client profile. If you find that these different product lines or services lines are largely three different kinds of companies, then you really need three different ideal client profiles for each of these lines of companies. And if they're different lines of business, more than likely somewhere along the way, you probably have different sales teams, right? Different account executives, different account managers, perhaps different sales development or business development reps out in front there, maybe even different marketing. But so the first thing is, are they largely the same kind of client that's buying broadband, fiber, and IT services, or are they three different kinds of clients? If it is the same client, it's a single ideal client profile. Within that ideal client profile, we need to identify who the buyer personas are that are most important that we build a relationship with. That's going to be found by, again, looking at where you've been most successful, the kinds of stakeholders you've engaged with the most, that were most influential initially and on an ongoing basis with that account. And from there, then we set about prioritizing a primary buyer persona. The second most important buyer persona would be called like your secondary buyer persona. Maybe there's a tertiary buyer persona. Maybe there's even a negative buyer persona where on the surface they look like they could be a good fit, but there's this one huge red flag that comes up that tells you that it's never going to be a profitable client. But at the minimum, you'll usually have a primary and a secondary buyer persona. And once you've identified those, then you need to actually build the buyer persona documents, do the actual research. And the one thing that I would caution you on is if you've been in the business of providing broadband, fiber, and IT services for several years or longer, chances are there's quite a few people on your team that think they've seen it all. And they probably have. However, if you really want to get this content creation, go to market strategy right, I would caution you to make that input that you get from internal stakeholders no more than about 20% of the input that goes into your buyer personas. The definition of a buyer persona is a blueprint, a definition of your ideal buyer based on actual research and some select educated speculation. So the institutional knowledge among your CEO or CRO or head of sales or head of marketing, that's your select educated speculation. That's about 20%. The other 80% of what goes into a buyer persona should come from doing the actual research, either by mining and studying how they describe themselves and the kinds of content that they share on a regular basis, or even better if you can do actual interviews with them. But at the end of the day, we need to get really strong consensus in each of these groups on what their biggest goals are that they're trying to achieve to get to the next level in their career, their team's career, and their company's goals. And we also need to understand the consensus on their biggest challenges, their biggest struggles, their biggest stressors. What are the things that are causing them to have to work nights and weekends, that mess up their family vacations, that are causing a rift between them and their spouses and their kids because they always seem to be getting pulled into work-related crap. Once we know the consensus on their biggest goals and their biggest challenges, then we're in a great position to build our content strategy and build our content calendar, because we know in their own words, not our guesses of what we think those words should be, because we don't allow the guesses to be more than 20% of the puzzle. We know in their own words what they're trying to achieve individually, what they're trying to achieve as a team, what they're trying to achieve as a company. And we know what they're struggling with the most, which if they really mess up, could really mess up their career. Once we know that, we're in a position to come up with our content calendar, come up with our events calendar. And I would tell you, for being in broadband, fiber, and IT services, especially if these are one coherent set of ideal client profile that buys all three services, I would lead your content strategy with exactly this. Is I would make your events, your virtual events, your webinars, your offline events, be the overall pillar that you use to drive all of this. And then all of the other repurposing can fill out everything else that you want to do with powering your blogging strategy, your website strategy, your SEO strategy, your email marketing strategy, your social media strategy, paid search, paid social. Everything will flow down from the recordings of these webinars, from the recordings of these offline webinars, like these lunch and learns and breakfast seminars and things along those lines, and co-marketed events that you do with other complementary kind of companies where you invite your reach, they invite their reach, you spread the cost, you spread the risk, and you have some great cross-pollination. Those can be especially powerful for companies in your community that share similar kind of overlapping complementary audiences. But at the end of the day, we're looking to educate and build trust at scale. That's our number one objective that we need to get it right with marketing and sales development and sales enablement and everything pre-purchase and ultimately post-purchase too, with customer success and account management. But at the end of the day, what can we do to be hyper specific about who they are, what they care about, and build our entire content engine, our content creation, our content promotion strategy, our go-to-market strategy around being seen as the definitive go-to experts, subject matter experts, teachers, trusted advisors, thought leaders in this space with anything and everything that has to do with our buyer personas at the intersection of broadband, fiber, and IT services. And the better job we can do with that, the more time they're going to spend with us throughout their buyer's journey, the more of those 28 touch points that they're going to be hanging out with us. So it becomes an almost certainty that we stay on the short list. And if we do this really right, in many cases, for small to mid-sized kind of purchases, we may have completely neutralized every competitive option in front of them by the time they're ready to be at the sales opportunity stage, where they're 83% of the way through the buyer's journey. In other words, your content, your events experiences, your thought leadership, all of this great education can be so fantastic that they're spending so many of those 28 touch points with you that you've effectively used this strategy to neutralize all of the competitive options. And you've also ended up with a buyer who's much less price sensitive, which is better for your margins, better for the morale of your company, better for recruiting, better for case studies, better for everything, is to recognize that the buyer is now in the driver's seat in order to meet them where they are and earn our way in as early as possible in the buyer's journey. It is a massive context shift for anyone that is still using the same playbook that they've used for the last 10 years. We can't show up as a transaction focused sales professional anymore. All of our sales professionals, account executives, sales development, our customer success and account managers need a makeover. They need to be seen as teachers, trusted advisors, consultants, and subject matter experts. And the sooner you can do that, the better off they're going to be, the better off your company's going to be, the happier your prospects and clients are going to be, and you'll put yourself in a really, really favorable position from a competitive positioning standpoint. So that's when it comes to, that's what I would recommend when it comes to having a company that does broadband, fiber, and IT services that wants to improve its content creation and overall go-to-market strategy. And that brings us to the end of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm so glad that you're able to join us this week. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of go-to-market sales and marketing professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And we're so thrilled to have you coming along with us on this journey. If you want to stay up to date on all of our latest and greatest resources that can help you level up your team, level up your company, level up yourself when it comes to all things related to growth in and around the data center ecosystem, make sure that you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter, which comes each week on Sunday directly to your email inbox. You can subscribe to that directly on our website at dcsmi.com. I wish you great success in growing your career, growing your team, growing your company's impact, and we'd love to be able to help and join you along the journey. Take care now. Enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe, and look forward to seeing you back again next time. Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.